Speed. Anytime you're ready.
Okay. So can you state and spell your name just so we have it properly for the record?
My name is Pierre Wilson. First name is Pierre, last name Wilson.
And since we have it, okay, we framed out your badge. Good. Okay. Can you talk about what your role was with the Lookout Mountain group?
Well, I was originally hired as a film editor on Operation Crossroads, which was before Lookout Mountain. That was the Abel and Baker shots in the Pacific. And then there was a 2-year gap there, and then they started this second series of tests. And I heard about it, and I asked if I could go back to work for them, and they said yes. So like in a typical military fashion, they sent me to MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, while all the time they were getting ready to build this place, take over this place in Laurel Canyon. So about a month later, after being in Florida, they sent me back here to Hollywood, and I lived just a few miles away. I lived on Gardner Street in Hollywood, and you know, I went up there, this strange place at 8935 Wonderland Avenue, and I was employed already, and they said, bring a hammer and pliers and screwdrivers because we're building and remodeling this place. And that went on for quite a long time because the test didn't take place until much later in the spring, I think. But by that time, they were ready to, receive the film. At that time, they didn't have a lab yet. The film went to the labs in Hollywood to be developed, but it was the labs in Hollywood had security channels that were approved by the armed forces so they could handle the stuff. Later on, we had our own lab, and lots of times on these tests, the film would come in and we'd work around the clock, processing it, taking a quick check to see it looked okay, and giving it to a courier to go right back out to the test area. So I was a film editor primarily, and from film editing, I went into being a producer-director, and then I sort of assisted the chief of operations there. And then he left in '60 to go to headquarters in Florida because there were many, this was the only self-contained studio, so to speak, but they had many detachments or squadrons around the country that did work for the Air Force, did documentary work for the Air Force or whatever was required of them. And their film was processed at various labs near their area. Like there was a detachment of the unit that I was with at Lookout Mountain was at Vandenberg Air Force Base. There was another one in Honolulu, and there was one in Colorado Springs, and that was to cover all the missile sites in the northwest part of the country. But there were detachments around the country to cover different projects for the Air Force.
Let's talk about the specifics of covering a specific nuclear event. Okay, people know a little bit about what a producer or a director does for a Hollywood picture. For these types of things, what did you do? You were told there was going to be a certain nuclear event. How did you rally your troops and set up your camera so you could document it?
I just shipped everybody overseas and said, get there and shoot. I wasn't there. But it's a military operation of which they know what's going on. What they photograph, maybe in a documentary sense, before the test takes place, what people may want photographed. Same after the test. But the day of the test and the test itself, it's a very technical operation. They have their cameras and their film, and they don't pick their locations. They might suggest to the person in charge of the whole operation where they want to be, and if it's safe for them to be there and okay for them to be there, they're there. But they're all connected with information, intercoms, and so on. They know what time is going to be, the test time, and they're rolling for that, and hopefully everything works out all right. No one directs an atomic bomb going off. Once somebody pushes the button, it's out of control.
It sounds like a lot of actors. But so were you at some of the events though?
Only one did I personally see from the air over Nevada, over the test sites in Nevada, and it was that night, or very, very early in the morning. It was still dark, and it was a device that was on a tower. And you could see I guess a red light or something. There was some indication of where the tower was. I don't remember precisely what it was, but we knew where we knew where we were to look, and we had the goggles and all of that, and there was a countdown. You could hear the countdown on the plane intercom, and then the device went off. At that time, these were not bombs; they were devices. They were testing different different devices for size or weight or whatever they want to try to scale them down and yet build up the energy release on them. And
So what was it like in the plane when the device went off?
just like in a movie. I mean, it was like, I've seen all this before, you know. It was really strange. I really didn't know what to expect. But there was the burst of light, the fireball, and then the thing that surprised me, because I had never witnessed one in person before, that one, was that you got an intense flash of heat for just a moment. And it was the heat from the explosion, and it traveled through the air. Of course, light travels the fastest, so you saw the flash and the bomb and the fireball, and then you felt the heat. And it was sometime after that, really, that the shock wave arrived, and you felt it in the airplane. And it wasn't a shock wave that shook you completely. It was just the airplane just sort of slid sideways. But by that time, the fireball was, way up and dissipated. There was no more fire in the sky.
Did you have any concerns about how the blast might affect you physically?
No.
Do you think that that's overblown?
No, if you're, you can be damaged by radiation, but all these people that were out there were, hopefully put in safe areas, and precautions were taken so they wouldn't be overexposed to too much radiation. So I don't know that I've never heard of anybody having a problem from radiation from any of these tests. I really don't.
Was it a subject of conversation amongst the group at Lookout Mountain at all? Was it a concern amongst the people going out there?
Well, never too seriously. I mean, I think that people talked about how many Roentgens they got that day or Roentgens they had here or there, but I don't think that nobody ever reached the critical point.
And it seems like from talking to several of the people who were there, people have kind of a gallows humor about the whole thing. Was that something that was very much a part of the operation? Did people think that it was the way of letting off steam?
Oh, I don't know. I wasn't there, and I never heard that kind of thing. I think that it was a serious operation that you were on, because if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, you could get hurt naturally. But it was also serious from a Defense Department standpoint, from the welfare of our own government and well-being. I mean, there really truly was a Cold War, and from the time the Russians exploded their first bomb, then it was a tit-for-tat kind of operation of who's doing the biggest and the best and so on. And, all that time we had SAC B-52s, or before that B-36s in the air at all times with bombs that they could be told to go someplace if they had to. And at that point, I don't think they had intercontinental ballistic missiles. I guess they were developing them at that point. And so if we were doing it, so were the Russians. And in the mid-30s, Russian planes flew over the pole from Russia and landed in California, near Riverside, California. So it was proof that they could, fly over the pole. So at the same time, it's proof they could have shot a missile over the pole. If we could shoot them from here to Kwajalein or wherever we wanted to shoot them, then the Russians could do the same sort of thing. So there was always that concern. You always had to be, or let them think you were one up on them, so that somebody didn't try to overpower you.
And the nuclear testing program became, and it has continued to be to a certain extent, a very, very controversial era. There's a great deal that people, great many misconceptions that people have about it. Looking back at it, do you feel that this was a very important part of our history? And now that you have the advantage of hindsight, what do you feel about this whole era of?
I think that things take a natural course, and they're going to happen anyway. I think that Truman was absolutely right in using the bomb. It ended the war. I think it saved a lot of lives, not only people from our country, but people from other countries, Japan as well. And it did end the war. It was a horrible thing. The only thing is, could he have asked them to drop a bomb 20 miles off the coast of Tokyo and tell the emperor to look out his window at that time and see what happens? They didn't do that, but it brought the war to an end. And for a few years, 4 or 5 years, that we thought, that was it. We were the only ones that had it. But then the Russians suddenly had it, and French and English. It's a matter of it's technology. And it can go forward in any country. Who knows what Iraq is doing now? It's a frightening thought, but you never know, because I've never heard of they've talked rumors of missing suitcase bombs and things like that, and I really have never heard of that. But I've often felt that a bomb could be concealed in a ship and sailed into a harbor, and with a, a crew that thinks they're going to go straight to paradise if they, commit suicide, they could destroy any, they could destroy New York or any seaport.
Which brings us to classification. How important do you think was the classification and the secret nature of all the research that was being done?
I guess it was important. I guess, it's a need to know, and it didn't need to be declassified. It was going forward under controls of classified restrictions. And if you needed to know something, you got to know it. Everybody at Lookout Mountain had a top secret clearance, and everybody had a Q clearance for the Atomic Energy Commission. But there were lots of things that, projects that I wasn't working on that I didn't know really what it was all about. It was pigeonholed here and there and so on. So that works okay. The security, I think, was reasonable. Things have changed since then. It's, 50 years later. And who knows what will be our next problem. You don't know. You don't have control of your life. So you never know what's going to come on. After all, Vietnam turned out to be a bigger problem for the country and the happy and unhappy people in it than atomic bombs were.
Okay, that's good. Let's cut. Great.
Get out.
Go. Join your party.
I do the same thing with my flashlight. That's why I got a little one, put it in your mouth.
Yep, we're speeding.
Okay, are we rolling?
Nothing's changed much, sir.
Yeah,
And speed. And look at her the whole time.
okay.
Pat,
Mhm.
can you say your name and spell it for us for identification purposes? How
Certainly.
you'd like it to read on the screen?
My name is Pat Bradley, Bradley.
And what would your title be?
My title was at Lookout Mountain, generally a motion picture cameraman.
Okay, great. Now, what was the purpose of Lookout Mountain in relation to the thermonuclear explosions?
They were charged with documenting on film the nuclear devices tested, both in Nevada and in Florida. Better start that over. They were.
Lookout Mountain was?
Lookout Mountain was charged with photographing all the nuclear weapons tests in Nevada and Eniwetok and Bikini on film for documentary purposes, not instrumentation. EG&G did all the instrumentation work and we did the documentary work. And in addition, they made training films of different nuclear natures, how to load a bomb and things like this.
Okay, great. Why were the tests documented?
You have to document everything. If you don't, you try to go back and remember what did we do here, or was this on the left or the right side? And the same way you set up a building and then blow it apart. You want to see what's being done and where the building is affected or whatever you're testing. How is the stress applied to it?
So can you tell us about some of the situations you found yourself in when you were filming these explosions? Maybe if you can think of, a couple of different situations that you were in.
I know the first one is one you'll always remember. It was in Nevada. It was a reasonably small device, and it was just before dawn, so we see the light go off, and you're so busy watching the light the first time, and you forget about looking for the shock wave, and the shock wave comes across the desert. When it hits you, just a big bang, and dust rises up in the air, and you remember that one, and from then on you know it's coming, so there's no problem. But there only one time I was leery. It was on a device was tested in Bikini Atoll, and at that time I was installing remote cameras operated by radio control on the island, and I would load the film in the camera, close it up, and get a helicopter ride out of the lagoon into an aircraft carrier where I'd stay there overnight, and then the next morning you'd come back in after the shot and recover the film. And it got later and later, and the helicopter didn't show up to pick me up, and the guy that was working with me, And I thought, well, I don't want to stay here all night because it's going to be 4:30 comes around pretty quick, and they're on a roster. So they should know I'm missing, but maybe they didn't. So I built a bonfire over there, and the chopper came in and picked us up and took us out to the ship. And fortunately, so we didn't have to stay there through that thing because it was a little too close. Now, that's the only time I ever had any, not really fear, anxiety, I guess would be the right word, that I didn't want to be left there alone.
Wow. Can you just, I guess, tell our audience what could have happened if you had been left there?
I'd have been vaporized. Well, if they have a roll call every time before to account for everybody, and if they went through the roll call and my name wasn't, and I didn't answer the roll call, they would cancel the shot until I was found. So it was pretty safe. But still, you don't know that that guy hasn't crossed my name off and left somebody else's on or something. So
Wow.
no major
Thank
problem.
goodness for roll call.
Mm-hmm.
So aside from the first thermonuclear explosion you ever saw, can you describe any other really amazing, spectacular explosions that you were able to witness?
Yes, the one different one that we say was when they fired the 280 millimeter cannon nuclear weapons test in Frenchman's Flat in Nevada. It appeared to have a double fireball, and that's the only one we've ever photographed that looked like it had a double fireball. And I've never heard an explanation for it. Maybe I can find out here tonight.
Rick, please be quiet.
Sorry, there was some noise.
Sorry, I gotta get that again.
Yeah. Can you just tell us about that explosion, about the double fireball explosion?
Yes, it was on the first and only firing of the 280 millimeter Army cannon, firing a shell, a live atomic shell in Frenchman's Flat, Nevada. And when it went off at, I believe, about 500 feet above the ground, it appeared to have a double fireball. And that's the only one at Lookout that we've ever seen before or since. And I haven't found out why, but if there was a reason for it, maybe I'll find out now that things are being declassified.
I know that you probably were in a lot of different situations when you were, your task was to film these explosions.
Mm-hmm.
What was the closest you ever were to an actual explosion? Do you know?
I guess a couple of miles up in Nevada.
Or the closest?
Yes, the smaller the weapon, the closer you get. I guess I was a couple of miles. I wasn't in the, I think the troops they had on Tumbler Snapper were like 1.5 miles. When I was about 2 miles back, I had some remote cameras in that area, or operating them from that area. But if you go overseas, and we talk, when you're having megaton weapons, you'll be out 50 miles away on a ship. And they want to be sure everything is safe. So.
We were talking to George earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and he mentioned a situation when, he was at filming an explosion at Ground Zero.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is that? Is that the closest you can get to an explosion?
No, you can't get to Ground Zero. He might have been in the air, photographing it from the air straight down at Ground Zero. But nobody is at Ground Zero and lives during the detonation. Afterwards, now if you go to Ground Zero after detonation, then you have a radiological problem that is kind of hot, and you're having a coveralls on, a face mask, and booties on your shoes, and you're limited in the amount of time you can stay there. That might be what he was talking about, that one.
That leads right into my next question.
Mm-hmm.
What type of protective gear, or were you instructed, in a certain way to maybe not look at the flash, or what were some of the safety precautions that were taken?
Well, if you're back at a safe distance, you just don't want to look at it unless you have your high-density goggles to look at it. Then you can look at those. If you don't have that, you turn your back. And the sky lights up and then it dims down, and then you turn around and look at it. But if you're going into a radioactive area after a shot, well, then you have, they had coveralls and booties to fit over your shoes, and they were taped. Your ankles were taped. Your wrists were taped, and you had a cap on and a breathing mask, and you would only, and gloves. You'd go in there just for a minimum amount of time to recover collect some sample and then get out of there. And you were allowed so many Miller-Makens, and that was it.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's
And go for it.
Is that door open? Can we close that door for?
working at Lookout Mountain was. Can you tell us just relate the time frame to that, and then the nuclear explosions of World War II, when the public learned a lot about this? I mean, at the time, was the public aware of all the nuclear testing? And if so, like, how did that make you feel about your work?
Well, usually when they would have a nuclear test in the Pacific or at Nevada, it was in the papers. The government would announce, the Atomic Energy Commission in those days would announce they're going to conduct some tests in the Pacific at Enewetak or in the Marshall Islands, usually they would say, same thing in Nevada. And after the tests, a lot of times they would release pictures of the detonation after it was over, when it was a nice, pretty picture stage. So those got released so the public knew what was going on, but only that there were tests going on. The same thing, our families knew we were there and photographing tests, but they didn't know any particular things about the tests themselves.
And did
We're doing an interview in here. Thank you.
I know this is extremely classified. Did your neighbors know what you did for a living? I mean, was this really highly top secret stuff?
Well, my neighbors knew that I was a civilian employed by the U.S. Air Force, and it was in photography, and that's about all they knew. And I just didn't go into detail. There was a lot of jobs that went on that were not classified. Many places to airplane factories or to runways or airfields, photographing different things about airplanes. We used to go and photograph the Thunderbirds Air Force demonstration team. And they'd gone on and put on air shows, so we'd photograph that. So there was most of our work was not highly classified like that.
Okay. Can you describe the top secret nature of the filming the atomic explosions?
The top secret nature is when you photographed any weapon or test device, so that would reveal the size of it, the shape, the weight, or the construction of it. That was always top secret.
Sorry, we need to wrap up.
Okay.
Which was away from all the testing sites, and they were detonating a device 200 feet down in a mine shaft. And although it was nothing, it just rattled. It was the most interesting thing that I ever saw. The other stuff I saw every day, and so I filmed it.
Why was it so interesting?
Because it just felt you were away, you were in the world. All the rest of the stuff, I didn't really know what it was like. But this thing was right in the heart of the state, and there were a lot of people around. And it was different. I can do it.
About sight for anything. And so I went to work there in 1960. I'd already been in business for 10 years.
You know, like home base for you guys. I mean, you could go out to the Nevada and then go out to the middle of the ocean.
Yes.
This is home base.
This was where we lived.
Yeah.
And so we'd be there, and like you say, we'd go all over the world. The atomic test that I was involved in, it was bombing in 1962. That was 5 months in Hawaii.
Not bad, dude.
No, it was great. We were stationed out of there, and we were down there Christmas Island, where they had the They also had some jobs to
I'd imagine that it might be part of to talk to anybody that's seen.
But you couldn't get in unless your father was in it for the day, especially in Hawaii, your father was in the business. You know, there was no Asians, no white people, no black people.
There's a lot of good
That's why I'm a local, which is $97 a day. To operate.
I mean, did it dawn on you, hey, should we ever be doing it? I mean, this is a pretty violent force. Did you say, did it ever cross your mind that maybe we should be doing this?
Well, I figured if those 5 volunteered,
Are you ready for us?
sure.
This will be just maybe 5 minutes.
The Life magazine called me the 5 brave men and 1 intrepid caravan.
I'm in charge of that.
I think the reason we can classify it is so many we've decided to look at the rules, and if it doesn't aid in need not
of the way that sailors were doing the severe proof thing I told them, we were
right now.
when did you leave?
So what you're saying though is it's a financial decision rather than
I didn't go to work Well, I'm in Vegas for skip.
You
Canon, the single framer that I was telling you about earlier.
Please, no pictures.